Hi there, Working Homeschool Mom. This is Charlotte from Charlotte Jones 24/7 and My Little Homeschool. And this is episode number 129 of the Strike a Balance podcast for Working Homeschool Moms. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you landed on this podcast. And I hope you'll find lots of episodes to help you on your Working Homeschool Mom journey. A little bit about me. I am a coach for new working homeschool moms, and I'll help you figure out that messy beginning so you can take your first steps with confidence. And if you're returning, as always, thank you so much for spending some of your precious time with me. I have such a great guest on the episode today. I speak to Whitney Whitten from Sensational Moms, and she is a nervous system specialist. As a fellow working homeschool mom, it was great to chat to her about how the nervous system plays a part in how we show up in our homeschools, how we show up in our lives, how we show up as mothers. So we talk about what it looks like to be totally overwhelmed, and then some steps that we can take to start managing this feeling of being overwhelmed. It's a really, really great episode. Some really fantastic nuggets of wisdom in there, and I'm sure you're really going to enjoy it. But before we get to the episode, I'd be ever so grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, or you could forward the podcast to somebody who needs some support on their working homeschool mom journey. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode. Hi there, and welcome to the Strike a Balance podcast for working homeschool moms. This is Charlotte Jones. I'm your host, and I am a podcaster, a speaker, a writer, and a homeschooling coach, specifically for working homeschool moms. I've been homeschooling my neurodivergent twin boys since 2017, and I've been a working homeschool mom since 2017. So I know it can feel really overwhelming to keep all the balls in the air all the time. So each week I chat about tips and strategies for being a happy and thriving working homeschool mom. I cover things like time management, homeschooling, mindset, and lots of other juicy topics like that. I also speak to awesome and inspiring women who manage to juggle homeschooling and work successfully and find out what their secrets are. And I also welcome experts who can help you on your working homeschool mom journey. I have lots of ways to support you, so be sure to check them out in the show notes. You can download my time audit as your first step to managing your time better. I have a Facebook group for working homeschool moms that you can join as well. And be sure to sign up to my newsletter for weekly updates. And if you need additional support, you can join the WHM Collective, which is a supportive community of working homeschool moms where we delve deeper into topics that are going to help you thrive as a working homeschool mom. Or if you need one-to-one support, be sure to book in a session with me. I'm so excited for you to be here, and I know you'll get so much value out of this episode. So let's get started. Working homeschool mom, I know how overwhelming it can be to choose a math curriculum for your homeschool. That's why I'd like to tell you about the online math curriculum we've been using for years, ctcmath.com. As far as math curriculums go, it has loads of great features that solve lots of the math issues we've had, and I know a lot of homeschooling families have. Here are just a few of the many features that we really like. Questions are adaptive, which means the interactive questions change in difficulty depending on the student's ability. The program uses a smart algorithm that tracks the student's progress and delivers questions based on their exact needs. The student doesn't even know this is happening, helping them to build confidence and master math concepts. Concepts are delivered through video tutorials and summaries which are clear, complete, and easy to follow. It's like having your very own teacher. This ensures your children understand something before they're asked to practice it. And then for us parents, CTC Math has extensive reports which are so valuable in monitoring your child's progress and spotting any gaps. And they offer a 12-month money-back guarantee if this curriculum is not for you and your family. CTC will provide a full refund, no questions asked. But I think the most important thing is a whole lot less stress when it's math time for both parents and kids. You get to outsource math with confidence, and your kids get a fantastic tailor-made program that makes learning and mastering math enjoyable and positive. Visit CTC Math today to start your free trial. CTC Math is also offering you, listener, an amazing special. When you go to ctcmath.com/MLH, you can get a half price discount plus a bonus 6 months for free. That's ctcmath.com/MLH. Today, I'm welcoming a fellow working homeschool mom onto the podcast. Whitney is a nervous system specialist and homeschool mom to 4 kids who helps touched out, talked out homeschool moms trade sensory overwhelm for connection and freedom. And you can find her over at sensationalmoms.com, which I think is such a cool name for a website. I absolutely love it. Welcome to the podcast, Whitney. I'm really excited to chat to you today.
Me too, Charlotte. Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about ways that working homeschool moms and homeschool moms can manage sensory overwhelm. It's such a great topic because obviously, if you're at home, you're working, your kids are there, it can be a lot. So maybe we can start by talking about what could sensory overwhelm look like for a working homeschool mom, because I think sometimes when you're in a lot of overwhelm, you might not even be able to kind of identify it or even know that you're in that kind of autopilot. So what could that look like? How could an overwhelmed working homeschool mom recognize that she is totally overwhelmed?
That is a great place to start. So, a word that I hear a lot of moms use is angry mom. I feel like an angry mom. So, that sense of overreactivity to what's going on around us, we might find ourselves more reactive instead of responsive to our children. Being snappy is very common. You might also feel shut down, checked out. You want to reach out, have meaningful moments with your kids, but instead you're scrolling your phone. You're disappearing back to the back room for what you thought was a 5-minute bathroom break, and 30 minutes later, your kids are looking for you. So over time, those moments can really add up. So you really have kind of two ends of the extreme. I think that the angry mom is a little easier to spot because that leads to a lot of guilt. So that's another sign of having those overloaded moments is responding or reacting to our child in a way that then later we think, man, that was out of line.
I mean, everything in life, I think, is a spectrum because you do not maybe think of yourself if you're totally zoned out as somebody who doesn't have that connection, I guess. But that makes so much sense because obviously, if you're angry, it's easier to see. But the other one is obviously just as negative in a homeschooling environment, in a parenting environment, I would say, in general as well. So that's really, really an interesting point.
Yeah, and we are in both of those roles as homeschooling moms, and it's a lot. I feel like we need to be speaking about the too muchness of a lot of the homeschooling life. And, some of us bring these sensory differences into motherhood, and some of us develop it as a result of just the overloaded sensory environment of being home with our kids all day for a lot of us. And that's just totally different than an environment that we're used to.
Yes, absolutely. And obviously, if you are adding work into the mix, I can imagine it can really, really, really make it really hard. And I love the idea how you're talking about talked out and touched out, because it obviously can also extend into your working life as well. I know I do a lot of talking in my job, and I also feel like, oof, talked out, and it can be, it can affect how you feel and how you react to your kids and, in your environment as well.
Right. And so if we are really wanting to homeschool for that connection that we feel with our child, having a positive relationship most days, right, is what we're going for. We're all going to have bad days. I acknowledge that. But if we're homeschooling partly for that connected relationship where we are responding in healthy ways and forming a bond with our child and forming a good family culture, then those are certainly things that we need to work on is how do we regulate ourselves through the overwhelm that is motherhood.
Absolutely. Okay, so then maybe, I mean, that could be an interesting next topic to talk about. So, how could we kind of handle these overwhelmed feelings? What are some practical things that an overwhelmed working homeschool mom can do to build, rather have connection rather than being reactive or totally zoned out?
Right. Okay. So we first need to realize what is going on. I think that a lot of power just comes from having the word to go with the thing. Because the narratives that we tell ourselves really matter. So, are we telling ourselves that we're a bad mom or there's no way I can balance work and homeschooling and motherhood? What are we telling ourselves to go along with this experience? And if we realize that it is sensory overwhelm and we can call it sensory overwhelm instead of fill in the blank, whatever that is. That is a great starting point. So just calling it what it is. And then we realize what has led us there, right? Okay, so learning our body's cues before we get to that point of blowing up with our child, saying things that we wish we wouldn't say, whatever that looks like for you. Before that means that you've disappeared for an hour and you don't know it's been that long. Okay, so what is our body telling us? So that checking in is really so important to realize what our body's cues are. Did we feel our heart rate speeding up? Do we feel our breath getting shallow? Do we feel hunched shoulders? Do we feel a tense jaw? So, learning whatever those cues are for our body and actually paying attention to them over time, we can start to learn before we get to that overwhelm point so that we can respond before then. So, that is of vital importance. It's actually an eighth sense, an interoception is what it's called, where we are learning what our body is telling us from the inside. So, we as moms check out so often from that. We prioritize other people's needs ahead of ours. We eat last. We go to the bathroom last. I mean, we do everything else first. And over time, that really teaches us to ignore our basic needs. And then before you know it, all the other signals that our body is trying to tell us start to go muted until you blow up and you become that volcano that you really don't want to be. So that is where I start with moms, is building that interoceptive sense. So from there, we talk about a sensory smart lifestyle. So if we are overstimulated by our children and our environment and our work schedule, then what can we step back and see? The eight senses, there's really not just five. How are we feeding ourselves and our own unique nervous system as mothers? So it's a lot easier to focus on the squeaky wheel, right? That squeaky wheel gets the oil. So we see, man, I'm getting really overwhelmed by my kids' noise or the mess in this house. This house is always a mess. We see what's overstimulating us, but we don't realize that our other senses that are meant to support those overwhelmed ones are being starved. And a lot of times those senses are movement related senses. So, especially as working homeschool moms, a lot of us do have stationary jobs. If we're working from home, especially. So, are we really being intentional about that basic need of movement throughout our day? And it doesn't have to be anything fancy and, a special workout routine. Those are great. But how can we sprinkle movement throughout our day? Maybe at the beginning of our work time, whatever that needs to look like for you and your unique nervous system. But being intentional about that is super important if we're wanting to move from being reactive to our overstimulation and instead being proactive to keep from getting to that point.
Yes, I absolutely love that because the idea of self care, obviously, I know we talk about it and we talk about it and we talk about it, but the idea of self care can be so overwhelming, I think, sometimes because we think it needs to look a certain way, because we think it needs to be hours and hours. But I love that idea of sprinkling in between, because that's obviously much more manageable, isn't it, than saying, okay, these massive blocks of time that you have to stick to. And it's like another thing, another task on the list of endless tasks that you have to do.
Absolutely. Yes. So the concept of habit stacking is great. Taking something that's already well established in our routine and then we're putting something else to partner along with it to build in. So that might be as simple as, I don't know about you, I wash a lot of dishes, putting a little bit of essential oil in the dishwater just for a moment. Our sense of smell is really unique with how it's wired in the brain. Yeah, it's just really powerful. So if you have a favorite scent, put some of that in your dishwater and have a reset moment. There are ways to build that into our life that don't have to be a whole thing. That, I like calling some parts of self-care basic needs instead of self-care because it really boils it down to, am I nourishing my body? Am I sleeping? those basic things that if we aren't paying attention to those, we are much more likely to get overstimulated. And I don't know about you, but as a working mom from home, before I know it, I'm up until 11 or 12 at night if I'm not intentional about telling myself that sleep is just as important as, that interview, or just as important as whatever else I'm doing with my work.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I know for myself, I used to do a lot of scrolling before sleep, and I realized that I was doing that for 2 hours before bed. It's so quick.
Yes.
And then I was like, okay, so I'm just going to change this for something else, like for reading or whatever. And it's
Mhm.
really made such a huge difference because sleep is an incredible superpower, though. I think
Mhm.
to really get a good night's sleep is like the best medicine.
It truly is. In fact, sleep deprivation with one of my children who has a hard time sleeping was one of the things that led me to start Sensational Moms, because I realized how much it had affected every moment of my day with my children. And truly, there are some times that sleep is out of our control, right? But when it is in our control, like when we realize we are scrolling for 2 hours or whatever it is, yeah, changing it out for something else is powerful. Or simply moving the phone to the opposite side of the room. If you use it for an alarm, great, just move it. Simple things like that to really prioritize basic needs.
Absolutely. Yes, it's so true. So, sometimes you did speak about kind of being really reactive, maybe, and having like a meltdown. How can we manage the mama meltdowns so that we can, have that connection, so we can have the freedom?
Regardless of how proactive we are in building that sensory smart lifestyle, we are going to have moments, right? So I work with moms on developing a plan for what you do in that moment. And I like to call it a CPR plan just because it helps me remember. The C would be compassion, and really developing your sense of self compassion. How do you speak to yourself in those moments? So you would ideally be able to remove yourself from that situation. Going outside is a favorite thing of mine, or I really will disappear to the bathroom, because one of my favorite things to do is mirror talk. I will look in the mirror and talk to myself as though I would talk to a friend. Am I speaking to myself in that overwhelm moment the way that I would speak to my best friend? If not, I need to check myself. That compassion really is something that we have to develop outside of those moments too, right? So the C would be for self compassion. The P is for practicing the plan. So that's where we have to be really intentional about. If I'm at home and I hit that overwhelm spot, what do I do? Where's a safe place I can go? Again, I mentioned one of my favorite places is outside as being a reset. So, going outside, looking up, and getting a literal change of perspective might be something to do. I actually have a list of 25 places to start for moms if they're not sure where to start, as a freebie on my website that I'll mention at the end. But that is a great way to know, okay, well, these are the 5 things that I have tried outside of the overwhelm moment, and I know that they work for me. Because I think, deep breathing is something that people hear of and they think, oh, well, I'm just going to take a few deep breaths. But really, when we have hit that point of sensory overwhelm, you're probably past taking a few deep breaths. We just are, where our autonomic nervous system is in a moment, we've hit fight or flight most likely, and you're not going to come down from that with a short breath and a long exhale. So in that moment, you might go to that quiet place, go to that outside spot, and engage your muscles is a great thing to do. You could do wall push-ups, even leaning against the wall and walking your feet two or three steps forward so that you can feel that pressure of your back against the wall. That deep pressure is very calming. So you could do a few different things like that. Again, it's imperative that you practice it outside of those moments, because that's not a place where we're going to learn. So we practice the plan that we've developed, and then we come back to our child or our partner or whoever we were with during the moment, and we reconnect. That's what the R is for. And I would explain in very brief terms that, again, that I've probably explained already to the person what's happening in those moments. And I acknowledge what's happened, right? If it was a reaction that affected the other person, if it's words that I need to own, I take responsibility for that. And allow that chance to reconnect and listen to the person if they're willing to open up and share their experience. Because we all have moments where we do or say things that we know weren't best. And it's usually those moments that when we don't reconnect and repair that leave us feeling like the angry mom or the mama guilt that just cycles on and on. But those are such powerful moments because we want our children to develop these skills. And what better way than actually modeling that in real life for the child?
I love that. Yes, that's amazing. And also, obviously, it's the idea of creating a plan specifically for you because, like I said before, often we have these ideas of what things should be like because of what we see and because of what other people tell us. But I think with self-care, with homeschooling, with everything, just to be able to own our uniqueness and to really know what works for us, I think is such an integral part of being happy and thriving as a mom, as a working mom, as a homeschool mom, I would say.
It really is. And I think that really playing to our strengths is very important. I mean, we're at home. We have the ability to set up our environment, we have the ability to set up a routine that is supportive of our strengths. And we know to play to our child's strengths often as parents, but what about our strengths? What about taking those into account? And there's so much power in being able to do those things for ourselves.
Okay, then that's a really, really cool concept. So, what would that look like in practice then, kind of playing to your strengths in terms of, avoiding that sensory overload?
If you're thinking about, especially that balancing, there's that verb, right? Balancing the work life and the mom and the homeschool, holding all of that and giving space for it. I think that considering your own alertness or arousal levels throughout the day is really important. So, if you are able to self reflect and think and realize, okay, well, I am most creative at, I don't know, say 9 to 10 p.m. That happens to be when I'm most creative, which is very inconvenient for those of us who like sleep. But being able to arrange my work schedule around those things. If you happen to get a second burst of energy at a certain time of day and you're able to maintain your mental focus, you know, can you work your work schedule around that? So in the morning, if you've tried to carve out 5 to 7 a.m. every morning for work because you think that's the only time you can get it done, but maybe you're not a morning person, you really may not be getting much quality work done in those 2 hours. So, really designing your work hours, and you can even apply those same concepts to when you're teaching your child, right? So, whatever the sticky part of your day is, if you put that when you are your best self, when you're focused, your energy levels are optimal, then your productivity, your connection will be so much better.
Yes, I always recommend that at the beginning when you start. I think it's kind of a part of deschooling as well because we have such very set ideas about when learning should happen, when work should happen. And deschooling is such a great time to unlearn those and to say, okay, so, my kids are energetic at this time, and so when am I, we intersect, and this is a good time to homeschool. Yes, it's 7 o'clock at night, or I mean, we used to do 5 o'clock in the morning homeschooling, but just to kind of
Wow.
unlearn all the what we think learning should look like or what we think work should look like. I think it's such a freeing thing to just unlearn all those things and just to go with the times where we are at our best. And if we can intersect that with the kids, obviously that's ideal.
Yeah, yeah. And that's exciting. It's really exciting to embrace that freedom. Like we were talking about connection and freedom. That's part of the freedom of homeschooling is being able to really embrace that. So, yeah, so understanding your own, I would love for moms to just chart that throughout the day. I know that you've talked about auditing your time to really see where your time is going. And along with doing that, you can make a little scale of 1 to 5, or maybe smiley faces, emojis, whatever, colors, and figure out, okay, 1 might be I may as well be asleep, and 5 might be the other end of the extreme, which is I can't really focus. I am so bouncy and excited, and maybe even irritable, really, is on that high end of the scale. And just see, okay, well, I'm going to take one work day and maybe one weekend day and see. what my normal patterns are and what we can work around.
Yes, awareness, 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 intention, so important, I think, in
Mhm.
general. It's those kind of two things are so important in having a successful life, I think, in general. And it can be hard to sometimes check in, but like you said, obviously it doesn't have to be like a massive big thing. You can just start small and then kind of build on that habit. But I think just the thing of trying to be intentional about your life, it is very, very powerful.
It really is. And that sense of inner awareness, that interoception, what has been shown to grow that is intentional mindfulness. And there are brain studies that show those areas of the brain being more active for people who have engaged in that, even for as little as 5 to 10 minutes. So, we're not asking you to be a yogi here. You can engage in 5 minutes, right? And they make lasting differences really throughout your day. So you can monitor your alertness for that work time to maximize it. You can also integrate sensory strategies to help boost your alertness because it's kind of like a rubber band, right? You know how you might reach for gum if you're trying to focus, or some of us might be fidgeters. Maybe some of us are kind of bouncers and or leg bouncers, and it might drive people crazy. There are all these ways that our brain is regulating ourselves without us even knowing it. But when you draw your attention to what you do intentionally or unintentionally, then you can use those same things intentionally to kind of stretch that a little bit, right? Because there are certainly going to be times where you have to, say, do a podcast interview when it's past your bedtime or whatever it is, and you need to be able to engage. So there are sensory strategies for that. A lot of them are oral strategies like chewing gum. I don't know about you, but snacking can be a huge thing. Before I know it, I'm like in the pantry snacking on something, and before I know what's going on, it's because I'm trying to alert myself and wake up, right? There are things like that you can do to really optimize that window of alertness.
I love that. Yes. And if there's any excuse for snacking, yes, please. I'm there.
Right.
I need
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
I need it for
Well,
my to extend my sensory alertness.
yeah, so crunchy, chewy things, straws are great. I love chewy straws. I'm not sure if you're a straw chewer, but the silicone reusable straws are my favorite. Just really grounding and calming for me. That chewing, it's getting that, using those muscles of your jaw. So there are ways that you can just kind of build that into your day. Again, you might be doing it without even realizing you're doing it. Maybe if I can remember to reach for the carrot sticks instead of the potato chips, that would be great. But yeah, those crunchy snacks are really alerting.
I'm a pen lid chewer. That's my one.
Oh yes, yes.
The
I
big,
saw
the old school big ones, those pointy ones. Oh, I
Oh
used to
yeah,
love those.
I can actually taste it now. Isn't that ridiculous?
So
I'm
simple.
a big chewer too. Pencils. I mean, it's amazing the stuff that before I worked with moms, I was a pediatric occupational therapist. And so I know what all this looks like for kids, right? But then looking at it through an adult lens has really been a game changer.
I can imagine, yes. All right. Thank you so much, Whitney. So before we wrap up, maybe you can tell everybody anything you're working on. I know you said you mentioned that you have that freebie. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and then where people can connect with you online as well. That would be great.
Thanks, Charlotte. So you can find me at www.sensationalmoms.com, where I have a blog that I update weekly or bi-weekly. And I'm actually going through this summer talking about planning 101 for moms who are overwhelmed and overstimulated. So what does it look like to take all of these things into account as you might be planning for your next school year? So you can find that on the blog. I also have a free private Facebook group, and you can find that by the same name. And it's an active community of moms that are trading advice and our own experiences, because really we need to be talking about these things more often so that we can break the stigma, the shame, and the guilt that comes from it. And you can also contact me for coaching on the website. I work one on one with moms so that we can really understand our own unique nervous system and how to account for that throughout our days to find the connection and freedom that we started homeschooling for to start with.
Okay, excellent. And obviously, I will link all of that in the show notes. It's been fantastic to talk to you, Whitney. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your experiences. I think it's really going to help overwhelmed working homeschool moms to think about ways to overcome that and to start taking those steps to that connection and freedom, like you said, which is why we homeschool, right? At the end of the day.
Absolutely. I hope so too, Charlotte. Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed the episode. Please let me know what your greatest takeaway was. You can reach out to me on Instagram at charlottejones247 or on my website at mylittlehomeschool.com, or you could even drop me an email at hello@mylittlehomeschool.com. I'd be ever so grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It will help spread the news about being a working homeschool mom, and in that way we can build this wonderful supportive community together. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care.